Okay, folks, here we go. Another one of our instructional videos. This one today, we're going to be talking about welt pockets. You can see a skinny example of a welt pocket here in front of us. I would imagine most of you are familiar with these, if not with making them, most certainly with seeing them. A welt pocket is quite simply a strip of fabric that you can see here that's sewn into the body of a garment that has access through the top down into the pocket bag. Where do we see these things? We tend to see them on anything that would be appropriately called in the 18th century a jacket. Now, the word jacket in the 18th century is one of those sort of strange descriptive words that has meaning without really having meaning. A jacket could be a waistcoat. A jacket could be what you would maybe call like a workman's coat or a sailor's coat. A jacket could be a sleeved waistcoat or something that you might refer to more as a vest, right? A really short, no skirted waistcoat. So if any of those words right there mean something to you, that's sort of what the word jacket could mean in the 18th century. It has sort of multiple meanings. Frustratingly, whenever you read descriptions of somebody who's run off in a jacket and you don't quite know what jacket they're referring to. But either way, that seems to be where we see welt pockets. Now, there is one other very prominent area that we will see these, and that will be in the waistband of a waistcoat, right? To make a watch pocket or a fob pocket, as you might have also heard it called. It will be made in the welt pocket fashion, let's say. I believe back in the times of COVID, we made a video on these, and unfortunately, if for those of you who have been on the menswear page, that video got deleted, but some Facebook update, and they made some changes to something to do with copyright or whatever. I'm not really certain what the goal of the update was, but either way, what it did was it eliminated all of the live videos that were on Facebook and saved onto places like the menswear page. And I do believe that this was one of those videos that we had done live at the time, so it's no longer there. So this will be the replacement for that. Welt pockets are pretty easy to make, truth be told, but they also tend to be one of those kinds of pockets that really confuse people. So hopefully we'll be able to demonstrate this for you today in a way that's rather digestible and understandable, and will allow you to achieve pretty decent amount of success with it. They're not difficult at all. So hopefully the mysteries will be dispelled today for those of you who find these to be rather confusing, and we'll get you something workable here, and you can start trying to use it. So as usual, we're going to be working in just whatever scrap stuff I have laying around. I will be using a contrasting color thread today so that you are able to see what I got going on. I would not recommend that for appropriate 18th century clothing. It's not really something that was being done, contrasting thread. So use color matching thread when you're doing this for real. As usual, also, I'll be doing this sort of at a smaller scale than would necessarily be done, sort of with the exception being of the fob pocket or the watch pocket on the waistband of a waistcoat, right? It would kind of come out to be about this size that we're looking at here, maybe a little bit more narrow, but yeah, we're not going to be doing this at sort of full length for the garment. So make the pocket, the appropriate size for the garment that you're working on, and we'll talk more about that when we get to the point where that matters. So let's go ahead and give the visual example we have here out of the way, and let's go ahead and get our working stuff in. So what do we need to make a welt pocket? Well, we need the fabric that's going to become the welt itself, which would be this portion right here. Obviously, we need a garment to put it on, so that's what this is representing. This is representing the body of a garment. For reference, this will be the top of the garment, and we'll just, for the sake of it, call that the front edge, okay? So the vent of our garment will be back here somewhere, if it's the type of garment that would have a vent. And we're also going to need a pocket bag, right? Typically made of linen, sometimes could be made of other things, depending on the quality of garment we're talking about. So, in the usual fashion, I've kind of pre-marked up some stuff so that we don't have to waste time, with you watching me, but we'll walk through it. So let's first talk about the flap itself, okay? So, you need to sort of work out what your desired height of the welt is going to be when it's over, right? When you're done sewing everything in. So for something like a fob pocket, right, the watch pocket on a pair of breeches, you may be dealing with a much smaller height and much smaller length than you would be on, say, let's say like a sailor's garment. This right here has a finished height of 3/4 of an inch. What we're going to be demonstrating will have a finished height of 1 1/4 inches, which would be more appropriate for an actual garment, an outer garment, an upper garment, sailor's garment type thing, as opposed to this, which is probably more appropriate for, putting in a waistband, a pair of breeches. So in order to achieve that, basically you need to work out some math. So what is your desired end height, and then double it, and then add what you need for the seam allowances, right? So for me, I want 1 1/4 inches, and we're going to be working with 1/4 inch seam allowances. So this piece is 3 inches, and then we're going to lose 1/2 inch to the two seam allowances, which will be demonstrated here shortly. And then obviously we lose another 1/2 because this thing gets folded over on itself, which again, if that doesn't make sense, it will here shortly when I demonstrate it. So 3 inches is what we got. And I'm just going to be doing a 5-inch length here to the thing. It might be more appropriate that this be 7 or 8 inches on something like a sailor's garment or, a waistcoat or something like that. Large enough for you to, actually get your hand in. This is obviously not large enough for anybody to get their hand in. We're just making it big enough for you to see what's going on, but small enough where I don't have to spend a lot of time doing seam work and wasting your time. The body itself, okay. So you can see that I have a sort of box drawn out here. There is a center line that is drawn right here. And again, I'm working with 1/4 inch seam allowances. So after you've drawn your center line, you need to draw a seam allowance line. For me, it's 1/4 inch below and one above that. Now for placement purposes, this lower line is where we are going to sew the pocket flap to the body. So if I pull the demonstrator over here, this lower seam line will become the line that you actually see when the pocket's finished. It will be this line. So this lower line needs to actually be located wherever it is that you want the pocket to be, if that makes sense. Okay, so let's say that I'm putting this into like a sailor's garment, right? And I know that the pocket should be in line with the bottom front button and the vent, right? On that, whatever that line would be on the garment. That's where I want the sew line to be. So that's what I want this line, the lower line, to be. The middle line is going to get cut open at some point here, and you'll see that when we get that far. And this top line will be the top portion getting flipped under itself. So if you see here, you see how the top is rolled under. That's what this top line is going to be. Now, I have two different flank markers out here. So the most outer flank markers, this is the length of the pocket itself. So again, I'm working with a 5x3. So that's what that is. It's 5 inches wide. Now, because I'm going to cut this open, just kicked you guys all over the place. Because I'm going to be cutting this open, the cuts will happen on diagonals, and we'll draw those in here in a second. So I'm going to come in another 1/4 inch on both sides and whoop, put those lines down there, okay? Now, I said I'm going to cut them on a diagonal, so you want to draw 90-degree little lines like that. You see that? So from this 1/4 inch in, we take from the center line, we want to draw a 90-degree or a 45-degree angle, I'm sorry, out to the other corner. So we end up with something like this. Does that make sense? So from the outside edge to the inside edge, we want to draw that. Okay. Now, placing in the pocket flap itself. Okay, here we go. This center line, where we drew here, right, is going to be the top edge of the pocket. Now on the pocket, you can see I also put the 1/4 inch seam allowance. So line up that top edge, and what that should mean is that the seam allowances match up when you lay it down, like so, okay? See it? Just like so. Now we're gonna base this into place, all right? So let's go ahead and do that real quick. Take some basting thread, and we want this flap to be anchored into the proper location. So we're going to go ahead and baste it in. So we're going to do one sort of side to side basting so it doesn't want to move. And then we're going to come baste across the top. We want to make sure that the edges line up all the way over. Doesn't have to be super close basting, but we also don't want a basting distance of 2 inches. And then we'll do another base this direction so that again it's anchored at the edge. Okay. Just like so. Okay, so now we're basted in, right? And we can see what's going on here. The top edge is on that center line. The seam allowance line should be matched up with the lower seam allowance line. So now what we're going to do is we're going to back stitch all the way across the seam line here. So we have the contrasting red thread here, and this is what we're going to do. We're going to go ahead and we're going to do a back stitch all the way across here, right? A back stitch is our main construction stitch, right? So that's what we're going to use. So we're going to go ahead and do that all the way across. Pay attention when you're doing this, because again, as you do something like hand back stitching, or even if you do this on a machine, because of the way a presser foot sits against that feed dog, sometimes the top layer and the bottom layer can end up in different locations when you get to the end. So when you're hand stitching, the basting should help prevent that. But when you're hand stitching, again, I sort of always pull the top fabric this direction while using my finger underneath to push the bottom fabric the other direction to just try to counteract that. So we're going to go do just a quick ugly back stitch here, because this isn't a video on stitching technique or quality, right? We're here to just talk about the pocket construction itself. So you can make this back stitching, as tight and as clean or as open and as loose and as dirty as you want it to be. It's your life. Make your own decisions as far as that's concerned. But yeah, for this video, I'm not that worried about it. And truth be told, in most garments I make, I wouldn't be that worried about it either. This isn't a seam that gets seen in any way. It's a seam that just has to hold. So this is one of those areas where you can really kind of just blast through and sort of be done with it. And my thread just broke. That's excellent. I love when that happens with linen thread, don't you? Linen thread, man, it's great and terrible all at the same time. Okay, there we go. By the way, so thread breaking is usually the result of, when you pull the thread tight, you're actually pulling the thread against the eye of that needle. This is a technique I've never really been comfortable with and most certainly haven't mastered. But if you would like to avoid that, a lot of sewers will actually, when they push the needle through and they grab it, they'll actually wrap that thread around their pinky, and they'll use that to, they'll pull it, and they'll use a little twist like that with their pinky against the thread, like that, to tension it. And that stops the thread from, see it? Boop, boop, boop. It stops the thread from pulling against the eye of the needle. But I'm going to be honest with you, I just never found that very comfortable to do. But it's a very popular technique. It's something that you see a lot of professional sewers around the world who are working at the highest quality do. So it's something you can play with. So you kind of put the needle through and grab it with your fingers, and then you wrap your pinky around that thread. And then as you pull it, you once you finally get to the point of tension, you just sort of seat it with a little move, boop, like that. And you kind of have it wrapped around your pinky, but squeezed in between that other finger. And you just, but it stops the thread from actually pulling against the eye of the needle. So, I suppose that's a good thing. Again, though, it's just not something I ever really got comfortable doing, so I don't do it. All right, so the stitching should not go beyond the edge of the pocket. So when you get to the end, knot it off. And there we go. So you can see how that tightened up, right? Because I wasn't really worried about the stitching technique for the point of this video. But can you see that? How it ended up short? That's why you actually need to pay attention to what you're doing and shuffle things around. So the whole diagram on this side is going to have to change now, which is fine. But there you go. You got to see it in action. So sometimes being lazy produces a teachable moment. So there's our 1/4 inch, and we'll go ahead and throw our little dots back in. But yeah, that's why you got to pay attention to that. All right, so at this stage, we've got the back stitching done. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take the basting threads out, and we're going to give this a press just flat. Now the reason we're giving it a press at this point, and you should do this anytime you finish either back stitching or machine stitching a seam, is you see how the tension is kind of all wonky along here. We want that to be more even. So grab a cloth to press on, because my pressing station is like in a different location that we're sewing in now. Moving the camera around, it's not ideal. So we made a mobile one here. So we want to just go ahead and do that and just press it along. Now I will say at this point, you should understand that I'm teaching you things step by step, right, so that you understand them. I would never press with chalk on fabric if I were doing this for real. So the next step I'm going to show you, which is cutting this open, I would cut it open before I pressed it. But we're taking things step by step so you understand them. So that you see how that kind of evened out the tension. That's what we want, okay? But never press while you still have chalk on something, all right? Okay, so now we've got the flap sewn on, and obviously this is not how we want it to be. So we have all these long lines that are drawn here, right? We have this line that goes across the top of the pocket flap, right? And then we've come in that 1/4 inch, which we have here and here, right? And then we've drawn these diagonal lines, both directions, from the 1/4 inch, right? So if we take a look at this, let's take a look at the diagonals. The bottom diagonal here, the one that goes towards the pocket, should go right up to where the seam is, okay? And if it doesn't, we want it to go right up to where that seam is. So we're going to go ahead and cut this open now. Okay, so we're going to take our little scissors. We're going to fold this thing in half, and we're going to cut it open right along that line that's on top of the pocket flap. So we give a little cut so we can get our scissors in. And we're going to cut along the top up until the point we get to that 1/4 inch right at the edge here that we drew this other line in from the edge. And from there, we're going to cut along that angle right up to the seam that we just did, and the other direction up to the edge right here. Boom, just like that. See, and it made a triangle. We're going to do the same thing along the other edge. So we're going to cut along here up until we get to the 1/4 of an inch in. We're going to cut in the diagonal right up to the seam. And we're going to do the same on the other side up to the line we drew. And there we go. And then once again, we've got this triangle, right? Okay. Triangle makes sense here in a moment. So now we want to press this pocket sort of in the direction we want it to go. So we'll go ahead and get our little pressing station set up here. So we're going to take the pocket and we're going to flip it to the wrong side. This is the wrong side of the fabric. And we're going to push the flap up and we're going to press the seam open here for the flap. So the seam that we made here, just go ahead and just press that open. Okay. Press it open. Grab your clapper if you have one and go ahead and just place it on there with some pressure. So what the clapper is, for those of you who haven't seen some of my previous videos, it's a piece of hardwood. And you use it while you're pressing because it does two things. If you've noticed the color sort of changed there, you can see the sort of wet spot. Because it's hardwood, it pulls moisture out of whatever you just pressed and steamed, but it will also hold heat because it's wood, right? But it's also cooler than the garment after it being pressed. So it will sort of shrink things into place. So you use a clapper when you want things to be permanent. So it will hold heat so that the shape you just made will stay into place, but it pulls moisture out so that you don't end up actually shrinking a garment, because shrinking is a technique, but it will shrink enough of it where it becomes sort of permanently set because this thing is cooler than the iron. If you just leave an iron on there to do this, it will burn it. So a clapper is kind of important. Now these little triangles on the edge, now we want to sort of push them back and press them down, okay? So we're going to go do that. And these don't really have to be perfect, but the idea here is that we're creating a box. Okay. And we'll do the same thing on the other side. So you see how it's folded back? So we're creating a box, okay? And now the top flap. You could do this one of two ways. You could eyeball this and just sort of pull it back, which is what I'm going to do to save time. Or you could actually put some basting stitches in along that 1/4 of an inch you drew in the chalk on the front side so that you know you're getting this exactly correct. That would probably be what I would do if we were making a real garment here for somebody, right? I want things to be nice and nice. Whenever people buy things, they spend their money on it, it should be nice and nice. But for a video, for instructional purposes, your time is money. So we're just going to go ahead and get through the process here. And I bumped you again, so now you're all shaking around. So yeah, for those of you who haven't watched other videos of mine, the camera is actually between my body and my hands. So every now and then my foot or my hands sort of bump the tripod thing and you start shaking around. But there you go. You can see we've sort of made this box, right? So if we flip this back to the front, you can see what we've done. We've pressed the flap up, but we've also made this box opening, okay? So now we're going to fold this piece in half, okay? But we got to go back to the back side to do that because we want to pull it through the hole, right? And we want the flap pulled down to the seam allowance down here. We want to pull down even with that. So we're going to go pull it through that hole and pull it down even to that, okay? And then, once we're satisfied that we have achieved that, we're going to go ahead and just give it a bit of a press so that it's in position. Sometimes it's a good idea to flip the clap over because then the other side doesn't have any moisture in it and it's still cooler, and it helps achieve what you want to achieve. Okay, so we flip this back to the front now. You can see we have the basic shape of our welt pocket in place, right? And we can clean this up here and if we needed to, which for the video, I would say we really don't. So now let's talk about setting a pocket bag in, okay? So here's our pocket bag. So I've cut it 6 inches by 6 inches for the video, but I would always do 1 inch longer than the opening just so I have some overhang, which is exactly what we've done here. So our top edge, of course, has to get folded under, right? Because we want it to be clean when we stick our hands into the pocket, but also sewing through 2 layers of linen is always better than sewing through 1 because it's stronger, right? So we'll just go ahead and give that a little press under, okay? So we're going to find sort of center here, right? Along here, we're going to kind of just find center, and for us, we're just going to eyeball it. And we're going to throw a few pins into this thing so it's sort of held in place, okay? You could do this with basting. If you're like really working on something, you know, basting is always a good idea. But again, for our video, I'm not all that worried about it. So we'll just throw some pins in because it saves us some time. And go ahead and shift this thing over a little bit. Not quite centered. There we go. So we throw some pins in. And there we go. They're held in place. So now we're going to whip stitch across here. Okay. That's what we're going to do. So let me thread a needle. And we'll whip stitch across the top. Remember to always wax your thread. It makes the thread way easier to work with. And, you know, will help protect the thread as well. You press things that wax will melt into the thread. And it will help protect it against, you know, things it will encounter throughout the life of a garment. It won't last forever. Usually the thread is the first thing to go in a garment when it starts getting old. Not always, but usually. Sometimes the lining material itself goes first, but thread's one of those things that will go. Okay, so we're just going to go ahead and whip stitch right across here. So where you're into the body of the coat, just don't sew all the way through, right? We don't want that stitching to be seen in the front. So just catch some of it so it's the pocket bag sort of seated over there. We're really just trying to anchor it down. You don't have to worry so much about it whenever you actually get over here to the pocket flap, because it's 2 layers thick, so it's unlikely you'd sew all the way through. But either way, we don't want to sew all the way through. So just go ahead and give it a whip stitch. You want to be using that whip stitch where you start the stitch, where the other one came out. That way most of the thread is hidden. And you do the forward movement with the thread inside the fabric. That will help protect it as well. The less of the thread that shows, in particular in areas where, you know, we handle it, the better and the longer it will last because it won't be getting caught on things and it won't be exposed to your hand oils and grime and dirt and whatever as much. So needle goes in right where the thread came out. We do all the forward movement inside the cloth, and we really don't need to take up that much of the linen. Just a few threads, that's all. Go ahead, stitch this all the way across. Now I say that because sometimes, right, whip stitch is done where the needle moves forward, goes into the cloth, and comes back out. That is quicker. This is neater. So we can do the other way of whip stitching in places where, well, we frankly don't care, because it won't be seen, it won't be exposed to anything, right? But here, our hands are going to be in and out of this, and objects are going to be in and out of this, and things are going to be dirty, and all that stuff will degrade thread. So we want to protect the thread as much as possible. So we don't really do this because we care that it looks nicer. We do this because it's better for the garment. And the same thing once we get to the edge of the pocket, make sure you're not stitching all the way to the front, because we don't want these stitches to be seen necessarily. We're just kind of anchoring it down and then knot it off when you get to the end. And there we go. Okay. So the pocket bag has now been sewn in to the bottom. All right. So as you can imagine, now what we're going to do with the pocket bag is we are going to flip it up to this doubled over piece of wool, okay? And the linen obviously needs to be rolled under again. So we're going to go ahead and give it a roll under so it's doubled up. It doesn't need to be rolled under, I suppose I should say, for the top, because your hand won't be accessing this portion. But it should be rolled under because, again, sewing 2 layers of wool or 2 layers of linen is better than sewing one, right? So we will go ahead and attach this to this top portion, okay? And again, you can throw some pins in so it's held into place. In this particular case, 1 pin's probably good. And we will whip stitch across the top now, all right? And the same thing, when you're on this outside edge, don't sew all the way through. You're just kind of anchoring it, all right? Now this top pocket, because it's, again, not going to get accessed by the hand, you can go ahead and place the needle forward over where the thread came out and then come up. And do you see the difference here in the stitches? The stitches kind of cut diagonal across. So you can do that up here, because our hand is not going to access this, right? This is this is going to be out of the way of our hand. So we can do the sort of quicker whip stitch up here. And that's exactly what we're going to do. We're just sort of anchoring this in place up here. So use this as an opportunity to shave some time off the work. And when you get to the end, you just, once again, knot it off. Okay, boom, there we go. Now, basic pocket bag is put in. So let's return to the front. So we need to anchor the sides down of this, and then we need to sew our pocket bags themselves closed, right? So let's start with anchoring. So we're going to take our thread, and we're actually going to start from underneath, okay? Start the needle from underneath and come up right at the bottom, right at the edge, okay? Just like that. And what we're going to do is a nice, tight, clean little whip stitch along the outside edge here. Okay. And all this is going to do is anchor that outside down. It's going to make it nice and clean. And again, if you had color matching thread, unlikely you would even see this. Okay, so we've gotten to this point. Okay, we've whip stitched all the way up to the top. Now what do? We're going to take this thread, we're going to come in on the outside like we had just done, and then we're going to come back up sort of right next to it like that. Okay, so go do that. Now we're going to start working with a prick stitch. So the first thing I like to do at the tops of these things is take a few stitches just to really anchor the top of this pocket in, so we don't rip it out as we get into it. So maybe just 2 stitches, that's enough. Okay, and then we just prick stitch right along the whole outside of this thing. Okay, and I'm sorry if I keep bumping into you while I do this. Like I said, the tripod's actually between me and what you could see, and I'm sort of got my head hanging over the top of the phone here, so I can see what I'm doing to show you how to do it. So every now and then my wrist or my foot bumps the thing, and I know it starts shaking around all crazy, and it makes it impossible for you to see what's going on. But anyway, so we just start prick stitching through all this stuff here, okay? And you can see that, right? And this is what it looks like on the other side. We're actually sewing through the linen for the pocket bag. This is why we want that overhang, because we want something to bite into down here. Okay? So we just keep it up. Prick stitch all the way to the bottom. Okay? All the way to the bottom. Okay, so now what happens when we get to the bottom? Well, what happens now is we just transition into the pocket bag itself and sew our pocket bag closed. And that's all we're doing. You know, we do this just with a little dirty running stitch, right? Like so. Until our pocket bag is done. And then we knot it off. And there we go. Pocket bag is closed and the side is closed. So you would do the same thing on the other side, right? The very same thing. And I'm not going to do that because it's just going to waste our time. So then give it a press. Boom, right? Nice and clean. Hit it with the clapper. And there you go. The outside edge is nice and tight and clean. Bottom's nice and clean. Now, there's one last little stitch we need to do. So once you get both sides sewn down the way I just showed, and the pocket bag is closed. We need to remember that our pocket bag on the bottom is just attached by that whip stitch, and that's not always the strongest thing. So we're going to go ahead and do a little prick stitch along here, just like with the other pocket flap. And you could also whip stitch along the top of here, and I'll demonstrate that. But you would need to do that before anchoring the top down. It's not essential because it is attached there, but if you wanted something cleaner, so when you pull your hand up, you're not pulling that top, you could whip stitch this, and I'll demonstrate that. But again, you would need to do that before sewing the flap down like we just did, okay? Which is not a big deal. There are many ways to do one thing, and there are many outcomes you can achieve. It really kind of just depends on what you want to do. So we got to thread up a needle here, and then we'll demonstrate both of those things. You know, maybe for making these videos, what I should do is just like preload a bunch of needles so that we save some time on this. But that's probably not going to happen, I'm not going to lie. All right, so let's go ahead and knot this thing off. Boom. All right. So, prick stitching along the bottom, okay? So once both sides are sewn down, just underneath that stitch line, we're going to go ahead and come up and just take a prick stitch through. And what we're going through here is you're going to need to put your finger like inside the pocket bag, right? And again, you could do this before you sew the flap down. Doesn't really matter. But we're going to go through all the layers that make up the wool part of the pocket and the pocket bag. We want to go through the pocket bag so it has a second point of being anchored. And I'll show you the inside here in a moment. This is why we're not demoing the other side, so I can still move the flap out of the way so you can see what this looks like. But this is just one more anchor point for that pocket flap so that all the weight isn't just on that whip stitch. Which again, for something like a pair of breeches, this doesn't matter, and you might be able to skip this step, you know, because right, ideally all you're putting in there is a watch, and because it's in a waistband, it's kind of pressed against your body the whole time and things don't really hang. With something like a waistcoat or a coat, you might be carrying something more substantial, you know, more weighted, and you know, something like a coat in particular. A pocket bag has a lot of opportunity to just sort of hang. Which means you could pull your pocket bag out over time, you know, potentially. So it should look something like this, right? Last stitch here. Boom. Take it down underneath. And we'll knot it off. All right. So what did that do? Well, if you look at the inside, I don't know if you can really see it. You see the secondary stitches there? It just gives a horizontal stitch in addition to the vertical stitch. So whenever the pocket bag gets sort of tugged on, it doesn't want to pull down as much. That's all that is. So you end up with this stitch along the bottom, just like so. Now the top here, right? I said that you could whip stitch that also. Now this is definitely something I would do before I put the flap permanently up, right? And even with the little prick stitch we just did, right, that might be easier before you put the flap permanently up, but that's easier to do even if you have already done it. But this here, okay, you start basically at the sides, okay, and you whip stitch up the sides And that helps put those little triangles into shape, holds them in place, right? The little side triangles. And you just stitch along here doing this whip stitch, right? You see what we're doing. Threads getting caught on every possible corner, but you can see what we're doing here, right? You see those whip stitches there into the pocket bag. And you just do that, you know, all the way along. And then we'll just make it, and you can see the linen threads breaking again. Tell you what, man, you hit stretches of this stuff and it just doesn't let it play nice. Let's get that pulled out of there. But you can see what we're doing. We're just sort of whip stitching along the top, right? Along top through the pocket bag. And you can see what it's doing here, right? It anchors the side down and it anchors the top down so that nothing catches. Now, do you need to do this? No, you don't, right? Because when you sew the sides down, right, you're doing that prick stitch all the way through, so you're not really going to have access to those little side triangles, right? As you can see, you just don't have access to them. So is it necessary? No. Is it something I would do? Probably. I might skip it for a garment I make for myself. But would I skip it for a garment somebody paid for? No, I wouldn't. Because it just makes it stronger, right? And less likely that something's going to go wrong in the future. But there you go. That's the basics of a welt pocket. You know, you have that access from the top. The sides are anchored down, and it's very clean at the transition because of the way that you've sewn it in. And if you had matching threads, it'd be very easy to mostly disappear the stitching. And of course the back side with the pocket bag actually sewn in. So there you go. That's how I do a welt pocket on historical stuff anyways. One thing to note is if you're working in something that cannot hold a raw edge, obviously I demonstrated this with some broadcloth, but if you're using, let's say, some linen, while the pocket is still fully flat, it's the sort of 3-inch thing, you just need to roll the sides in. So let's cut a scrap real quick and I'll show you what I'm talking about. So let's cut a piece off of this thing. So let's say that this is our pocket flap here, all right? Okay, so this is our pocket flap. And let's say that this is linen, okay? So it's gonna be a finished pocket that looks like this. All right, so it's gotta get folded in half. What you need to do first is fold the two sides under, okay? Like so. See, just fold them under like this. Now this is going to be a bulky mess in broadcloth because it is. You fold the sides under like that, and then you would stitch it in as we showed in the video, and then when you flip this up and over, you end up with, you know, something that looks more like more like this, with the sides folded in, right? And then all the rest of the construction is the same, but you need to know that if you're working in something that will fray, you need to fold the sides in before you stitch it down and fold it in half, okay? But with something like broadcloth, you don't need to do that because it holds its edge. So that's the welt pocket. Anyway, that's all the techniques for it. A little quick few extra things to consider or that you could do with it. But I hope this is helpful to you guys and understandable. It's one of those things where there's a number of variables, and it would be very difficult in one single video to kind of walk you through all the variables. So I try to talk you through them while giving you the basic understanding. Getting the flap in and the pocket bag in is sort of the bigger deal. Whether or not you do this stitching, it's not a make or break moment. whether or not you do, you know, this sort of whip stitching we talked about. It's not a make or break thing, but getting the flap on the way we talked about and the bag in would be, right? So tried to focus on the major portions, and you guys can play with minor details from there to make the technique your own. So I hope it was helpful. As usual, feel free to reach out to me for any questions or clarification. And as usual, I am more likely to see your comment and respond to it in a more timely manner on the menswear page on Facebook than I am directly through YouTube. However, when I do see your comment on YouTube, I will respond to it, no question. So I hope everybody has a Merry Christmas, as it is that time of year. For those of you who watch this well into the future and don't understand why I said that. And everybody be well, and I will talk to you again soon. Goodbye.